Hi, this is Paul. I have to ask the question, has Jordan Peterson become Fat Thor? I was thinking about that when I was listening to a variety of videos when I had to take my wife's car in for service and had to drive back and forth a few times. I first used the Fat Thor. I first used the Fat Thor analogy in a video. Tammy Peterson on it. It was January of 2024. Free Will Agency, Make Nihilism Great Again, and Fat Thor. And I thought about it. Yesterday, Algo served me up this video from Liberty Lockdown entitled The Tragic Decline of Jordan B. Peterson. And of course, these kind of videos usually Algo serves up to me. And I was also talking to Strawn. Some of you know Strawn, early guy, and he was he's usually telling me things about things on the internet that I just don't come across myself, and I'm trying to understand them, and he's explaining them to me. And so this video actually helped me understand some of the current fracturing of what was sort of the Peterson sphere or the IDW. And but not just that whole specific drama that's going on that I'm frankly not terribly interested in, but I was actually able to listen to this video and understand it. But what interests me is how often these kinds of disclaimers are made before the complaint.
About that, Doc, I want to start by saying, big fan of Jordan Peterson, and I still am. And I don't. This is not meant to tear him down or deplatform him, which is what I think they're trying to do to Dave Smith and others. I respect him tremendously, and I think that his work has given purpose and meaning and value to a lot of kind of rudderless young men's lives. And for that, as far as I'm concerned, the rest of your life you could do nothing, and you should always be credited with that. That doesn't.
So there it is, and this is what I hear again and again and again and again, and then of course. But, and even one person in our circles, I won't name him because this video goes a little further than his channel does, but he said, Daily Wire should pay Jordan Peterson to not make videos for a while. And when he said that, I thought, wow. So, all of this gratitude to Jordan Peterson for the role that Jordan Peterson played in 2016, 2017, 2018, and then I'd say even when he came back from his illness, but that of course sets up something like this.
Doesn't change the fact that what you're saying today, I think, is ultimately counterproductive, and I think that it is to the detriment of your legacy. Can I have both of those thoughts at the same time? I hope you'll permit me to, because I do. That's how I feel. I respect what he's done. I don't respect what he's doing. Makes sense.
Now, I was on the House of Woo. Let's see if I can just tab over to. No, I can't. I was on the House of Woo, and where's the House of Woo? Here it is. And Rick was talking to me, and Rick was basically talking to me about sort of the first turn that happened, because of course when Jordan Peterson sort of came on the scene, he had very broad interest and support from, let's say, I hate these terms because they're increasingly useless, but right and left on the spectrum. Christian Reformed clergy who are now disaffiliating with the Christian Reformed Church because of what's been happening in the Christian Reformed Church. They disaffiliating to the left, okay, over same-sex marriage, over wanting to affirm same-sex marriage. They're on my channel, Len Vandazee, others. What was amazing about that Jordan Peterson moment very early on in sort of wave one. David Brooks says of Jordan Peterson, the most important intellectual of today. I don't remember exactly what thing that he made. And then, of course, there was then a turn when I'd say the cathedral or the Blue Church decided, no, we need to reframe Jordan Peterson and we need to reframe him outside the bounds. And then there were regular talking points that were around concerning Jordan Peterson. And, I've lost in real life people won't talk to me because they'd be like, "Are you still making videos about Jordan Peterson?" This is like 2020, 2021. I'd say, "Yeah." And I just don't want to talk to me anymore. So, okay, I'll keep talking to you. I can't make you talk to me. But again, Jordan was sort of framed in a certain way by the left, and I've always considered that to be a misrepresentation of Jordan. And I regularly tell people, as I told Rick in this video, go back and watch Jordan in his college lectures, watch the first biblical series, and even today, watch the Bible seminars, because I think you'll see Jordan there. And here's the thing. Here's a lot of people wonder why I don't even cancel people in my own personal life. And the reason is this, that people have a lot of ideas that I will agree and disagree with. And there might even be some ideas that I find difficult, but that's only one idea that person has. And they'll have other ideas that I agree with. And people that say want to pick a fight with me upon seeing me or having me on a screen and say nasty things about me, they're the kind of people that if I would say, "Hey, can you hold my wallet while I go over here and do this?" I would give them my wallet. I would give them the keys to my house. I would give them the keys to my car, because I trust them. But I trust them in certain areas. And all of my interactions with Jordan Peterson in person have been absolutely amazing. And I, like all of these other disclaimers, I owe Jordan Peterson a tremendous debt of gratitude. And I think many, many people and many of my friends owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude. Just today, I made a clip of this massive Randos conversation that I had with Ethan Cawhey. And, I told him the story about how this thing got going. And I asked him, how did Jordan Peterson help him? And he said, well, he didn't really help me in terms of sort of kicking up my agency, but he really taught me about how to set goals and set an aim and pursue them. And so there are millions of men somewhere between the age of 20 and 45, I would say, that Jordan Peterson made an enormous difference in their life. Another video that I was listening to this afternoon, The Rise and Fall of the Intellectual Dark Web, Aaron McIntyre and Dave Smith. I'd never heard of Dave Smith until I was hearing all of this chatter. I'm such an internet neophyte because I don't know who these people are half the time, and then people will send me messages and say blah 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 about so and so. I say, who's that? And then I'll maybe look them up on Chat GPT or something and say, well, send me a clip or send me a video or send me something, and I'll but here again, the same thing.
To stand around and say, oh, you're a comedian, so you can't make these comments. And, I'm a guy, Jordan Peterson has had a lot of faults. I certainly, am not blind to them, but I'm a guy who benefited very directly, like on a very personal level. I lost a wife young, and Jordan Peterson's work helped me understand some things that I just did not grasp. His debate with Sam Harris over what truth is, ironically, launched me on a philosophical, quest that I have continued to chase down to this day, to understand that Peterson was far more right than Harris in that debate. And the fact that was so incomprehensible to most classical liberals shows a very serious flaw in that ideology. Those are things that are really important. So again, I don't want to downplay and just demonize every one of these guys, but I have to say, as someone who watched them and frankly listened to them, just record basically a decade of podcasts about how important free speech is and free inquiry, and we have to have conversations, and we can't talk about deplatforming and censoring people and not having discussions just because the left doesn't want us to have them. To watch these guys almost like in order fall in line, and of course, not all of the new ones are part of the original cast. You got guys like Konstantin Kisin, guys like Douglas Murray. They were adjacent to this stuff, but they're not, officially or whatever. Guys like James Lindsay, they're always in these areas. They're teamed up with guys like Peter Boghossian and these kind of guys. But that legacy, that position continues to persist. And to watch each and every one of them, almost, again, with the exception of a guy like Brett, for the most part, line up and be like, Dave Smith should not be allowed to speak in public. Like, Joe Rogan, how could you be platforming someone? It's like, what happened to you guys? Do you really think you were going to be able to pull the heel turn and no one would notice? It kind of blows my mind. Like, I understand they don't think about this deeply, but still, like, there's a self-awareness that you think would kick in at some time, right?
It's really something. And then even, right, like even by their own stated principles and their own stated
well, the purpose of this isn't that issue. Smith will basically go on to say almost the same thing about Jordan Peterson. Again, there is such an enormous well of gratitude among men of a certain age for what Jordan Peterson did in that first wave that, right before they begin to say he's lost the way. He was sure important, and I'm sure grateful, and I'll be that way for a long time. It's so interesting. And again, well, where was it? Is it the influence of Daily Wire? That's something that comes up. I made a video, I remember, because I was on vacation. I was traveling up to the Pacific Northwest, and I was in Oregon when David Wilson from Rebel Williams made the video basically about, I'm out of I'm out of the Jordan Peterson sphere. I'm kind of done with this. And for him, it was sort of the bipartisan, both sides nature of it that he liked. And then when he got framed in a certain way, and then when he would do the kinds of things like he did now after the Canadian election, just goes on a rant. And what's funny is that initially a lot of his rants people really agreed with, and now sometimes some of his rants just seem, I appreciate the fact that your man lost, and I appreciate the fact that you're concerned about your country, but yeah, I mean, this is
signal to a degree that was virtually impossible as he impoverished Canada to no positive end whatsoever on.
And so Jordan, hey, it's his channel, gets to rant. The internet is all about ranting, but people wonder. I mean, his book, We Who Wrestle with God, it's nearly unreadable in some ways. And, there was so much excitement for it because he was going to sort of, and it isn't that he doesn't have good ideas in. I was doing some membership videos on each chapter for the book, and I did for a while, and I just basically quit because my critique of every chapter, not that there weren't good ideas in it, but that, a chapter should sort of be like a string of pearls where you go from one idea to the other, and the author sort of leads the reader along with as they go from one thing to the next. And often the book was sort of like pearls in a cup, or sometimes pearls on a desktop, and it's like, I shouldn't have to work this hard to figure out what you're trying to do, because this is a book that you've obviously poured a lot of yourself in. It bared some similarity to Maps of Meaning, where he said, I wrote some of those things rewrote some of those things 15 times, and when I read the book, it was like, yeah, it shows. You do so much better speaking. And his performance at ARC, I commented about that before. When he's on his tour and he has like an hour or so to try to unpack an idea, you can do that off the cuff because that's sort of what it is. But at ARC, when you've sort of got 15 minutes to hit a point, and you're doing this sort of in concert with other speakers, I'm not saying you have to work from a manuscript, but you're going to probably want something fairly tight so you can just hit bang, 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 or really one point and some illustrations, land the plane, and be done with it. So, I mean, he's been struggling. His Joe Rogan was interesting because Joe starts, I haven't even finished listening to the whole thing. And of course, there's drama in this about that the Liberty Lockdown guy gets into. He lays it out fairly well, exactly what he thinks. But that drama is not really, that drama itself isn't really what I'm interested in. What was interesting about this conversation is that Joe Rogan starts this conversation in a topic basically about Hollywood men and in marriages to difficult women and how those marriages destroyed those men's career and sometimes the man. This is a conversation, and here's your buddy, and this is the Joe Rogan experience. You're just going to have a conversation, and you're Joe's friend. Joe likes you clearly. You're both friends with each other. Starts out in this rather interesting conversation, which is a conversation that I'd love to hear Jordan really engage Joe with. Go back and forth. And it's a terrific topic. Jordan's got a lot of expertise in this topic. He's got a knowledge in this topic. Joe starts the conversation. I'm thinking, this should be good. And Jordan sort of derails that. Okay, fair enough. You don't always have to talk about what the other guy wants to talk about. But Jordan kind of goes into this mode, this sort of mode often now with the Bible, where I'm going to tell you what I think and tell me what you think about it. But we're never quite convinced. He's always that interested in what the other person wants to think about it. And then very quickly, the conversations get disconnected. And that was certainly true. A conversation that I've mentioned before where he had Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke. And, I talked to John a little bit about that. And the conversation with Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel was, both at ARC and in that conversation was just not going to, Thiel was doing to Jordan what Jordan has done to many other people. And again, while there are interesting ideas in there, the frustrating thing about these kinds of conversations is that, generally speaking, when you have a couple of really interesting, knowledgeable, worth listening to people in there, and to use a Vervaeke term, the dialogos, you get the dialogos going, there's sort of a natural arc to a point. Now, not all points sort of realize their full arc, but so often what happens in Jordan's conversations is that they get disjointed. And they usually get disjointed because Jordan has, and I don't know exactly what's going on in his mind. Does he have an idea that he really wants to push? Is he just sort of one thing to a next, a little ADHD? But what you really want is both people sort of working the arc to a natural conclusion and then pick up another arc. And again, for Jordan, if you listen to him in one of his impromptu lectures where he's a famous rabbit trailer, and that's not a bad thing. I do exactly the same thing back in the day when I was a missionary and I had to do deputation, fundraising for my mission. I would have one or two churches that I would preach, one or two sermons that I would preach in church after church after church. It's sort of like the missionary slideshow. And I always got bored with that. So I'd have my own rabbit trails, and my wife would be sitting there like, he's changed it. Where's this going to go? Is he going to be able to bring it back? And Jordan does that very well. And that's part of the reason his stage talks generally do well, because he's got a bigger canvas. He can run around a little bit. But a lot of these conversations online are just not going well. And as I've mentioned many times before, Jordan, I don't think he does this consciously. But one of the things that I've noticed is that for Jordan, the sense of status that Jordan has relative to the other person always sort of dictates how, let's say, accommodating Jordan will be. So Jordan was tremendously accommodating with Peter Thiel, and Jordan just trying to get a point in. Jordan was tremendously accommodating with Elon Musk. Jordan clearly thinks a lot of these billionaires, and because they've achieved some things, so rightfully so. And as someone who is sort of trying to host a conversation, which is what Jordan is ostensibly doing in his conversations, I host lots of conversations, and anybody who watches this channel regularly knows and has your own judgment on how well I do or don't do with them. And there are lots of different kinds of conversations to have. But when he has conversations with a lower status person, I mean, and the Worldly News Tonight comedy sketch that Chad did on Friday, when they talked about Jordan doing Randos conversations, I mean, they basically were thinking out loud what many of us were thinking, that I remember his conversation with Louise Perry, who, again, I think Jordan Peterson respects Louise Perry and respects her work, but poor Louise Perry didn't get a word in edgewise. And again, poor Jordan Hall, in that the Daily Wire exclusive conversation was a lot better. But the first conversation, that's why I made the video. Jordan, it was sort of like the meme with women. Poor Jordan Hall was just sort of like a floor lamp in that conversation for much of it. Hardly got a word in edgewise. There's also a piece on Substack, Jordan Peterson's Liberation Theology. Oh, that caught my eye. And I don't know if sort of the liberation theology thing works in this, but I talked with Rafe Kelly a little bit, right after listening to Jordan's final talk at ARC, and listening to Jordan, not so much in the biblical seminars. It goes much better in the biblical seminars. And I hope that Daily Wire puts that other one out soon, the gospel one. And yeah, I've already read the book of Revelation. I want to see it happen. Book of Revelation is an interesting book. It's a super interesting book. It's a super complex book at so many levels. So deciding to host a conversation like that is tremendously ambitious. But he's got a lot of quality people around him. Something interesting should come out of it. But initially, when Jordan was doing his biblical series, let me say it this way. Right now, when Jordan, I always said there was a concordism with how Jordan uses the Bible. He's looking at the biblical material and he's trying to line it up, usually with something psychological. Or that's generally what he does. And that's what he says he's going to do. Speaking as a psychologist, I see this in the Bible and I understand it this way. I see this in the Bible and I understand it this way. And fair enough. That's become increasingly rigid as he's developed it. And this is where it gets into the question of enchantment and disenchantment. What happened with Jordan Peterson in 2017, 2018, in the early biblical series, in his first biblical series, is he re-enchanted the Bible for people. In that the Bible was, for people who had been in church and had sort of gotten stuck in their growth, their spiritual growth in church, the Bible was already mapped territory for them, and Jordan Peterson re-enchanted it and showed them some new mappings. I think what Jordan is doing right now with the Bible is disenchanting it. When I look at, he's sort of taking these biblical stories. Again, when you listen to him in the first biblical series, he'd be like, there's no bottom to this, there's no bottom to this, no bottom to this. He really re-enchanted the Bible for people who knew their Bible. They could see it in new ways. For people who had never really given the Bible a serious listen, suddenly it was a magical book and they were interested in it. Just go watch those early Randos conversations from 2018 with me. Person after person after person after person. Jordan Peterson basically re-enchanted the Bible. And what is happening, again, not so much with the Bible seminars, but when he goes on these podcasts like Joe Rogan and Bill Maher, and it wasn't so bad with Bill Maher. Bill Maher is an interesting critter. I've listened to Bill Maher for decades now. I used to watch him. I watched him very carefully when he was on ABC TV, and I really loved that show. And I still have even though obviously Bill Maher's a great example of someone that, on one hand, I mean, he just mocks my religiosity, but on the other hand, he doesn't do it personally. Obviously, he doesn't know who I am, even though we're both from New Jersey and we're both about the same age, along with Jon Stewart. It's a really interesting cadre that grew up in New Jersey about that same time. But I've always benefited from listening to Bill Maher. Doesn't mean I always agree with him, but I've always benefited from listening to him. But Jordan, on many of these things, he brings out the Bible, but he's disenchanting the Bible. And so I think the Fat Thor image is appropriate, because I'd like to see Jordan get his mojo back. How will that happen? I don't know. You know, it sounds like he's going to church with his wife. I think that's a great thing. But it does seem he's stuck in some ways. And that's normal. You know, he had a tremendous arc for a while, and then he was sick, and then he was just trying to get his feet out from under him. I have no idea how well Peterson Academy is doing. It's probably doing fairly well. I haven't coughed up the money for it or watched any of it, but I think he's gotten good people, and they're probably doing good work, so I hope it's going well. I've spoken a lot about ARC. I think ARC has some potential, but I don't think ARC has any idea what it is, and I don't know that Jordan quite knows what to do with it either. And it's completely dependent on Jordan, because without Jordan is the one who, again, this deep well of appreciation and gratitude that Jordan has in the culture. It's there, and it's not lost. But again, it's sort of like, you know, visiting and saying, oh, now obviously it would have to be a carnivore diet in there, and he probably wouldn't be fat. But it is sort of like, boy, I was, you know, you were really something. You were really something. And I don't have any problem saying it. I think God really used you to do an amazing thing. I would not have made anywhere near as many videos or paid anywhere near as close attention as I did. Just go back into my back catalog. There's a lot of videos back there. If I didn't think that God was really doing something at that time and place. But now it's like you sort of lost your way. I'm not sure what to tell you. I don't have an answer for you. And I don't think listening to Baroness of grasping the sword, because too often that's sort of what you're doing in a lot of these videos. Is you're shrill, you're reactive. And part of that's difficult because it was through the rants that a lot of good things did. But those rants in 2016, 17, and 18, they were sort of the moment at that time. They were fresh. We hadn't heard a lot of those rants, and they had been built on decades of his experience. I mean, in many ways, that's when he was sharp, because being in a college lecture hall, being on a university campus, doing that clinical work, I still hold to this day that the loss of those professions were an astounding loss. Now you might say, well, but he's so much more famous and he has more money and he has these bigger platforms. But I think for him, that discipline of connecting with college students then, working with undergraduate students, doing the other business things that he was doing, working with patients, I think that was an amazing mixture that really, so that was sort of prime Jordan Peterson, and that was prime Thor. And yeah, and the moment lightning struck, the moment happened, and amazing things happened. And again, I think just like all those little disclaimers, Everybody's out there saying the same thing. Boy, I've got a world of respect for Jordan. But what's happening now? And again, I don't think he's doing bad things. I think he should get on internet, YouTube, and tell us what he's thinking. And I don't know. I don't have a lot of specific advice. Is cheap. It's worth what you pay for. Unsolicited advice, it's probably worth nothing. But so I think, yeah, I continue to pray for him and his wife and his family, and yeah, the Fat Thor period. I'd like to see that period end, and I'd like to see him find a new way. Again, part of this to me is it's really hard. We are always being shaped and formed by our circumstances. And so as a college lecturer, as a clinician working with nobodies, as a college lecturer teaching to nobodies personally every week, grading papers, having office hours, these are formative. And so when he first comes on the scene, in a sense, he's primed. He's just instinctively, intuitively known all of these things and could just speak to that moment. What's his life look like now? He's, he can talk to the wealthy and the powerful. He can't go pump gas. And I take that seriously. I know a story. I have a story from a mutual friend of ours of a situation that happened. His need for bodyguards is real. It just is. Because of who he is and everything that's happened around him. And, so you're just all of the benefits that he had. And so I think if he wants to slim down and to have lightning strike again, it's going to be much harder the next time, because with all of the limitations, ironically, that he has on him, everyone would think, no, he doesn't have limitations now because he can talk to almost anybody that he wants to. Yeah, but again, bunches of people won't talk to him now, at least not publicly. And I take him at his word. I think he's exactly right. I think we saw that in the last presidential election. Donald Trump, he'd go on Joe Rogan. Kamala Harris. And I think, when you look at what, say, someone like Gavin Newsom is doing now with his podcast, Gavin Newsom is trying to get in shape to go on Joe Rogan. Because Gavin knows there's no becoming president of the United States without sitting across from Joe Rogan and getting invited on there. So, and Gavin Newsom had Steve Bannon on there. And so I don't know what Jordan needs to do, but I'm sure that it has everything to do with what isn't in front of the camera. And to figure out now, with the significant limitations that he has, I think, again, part of the reason his biblical seminars, I think, have been good is because, again, most of the people in those biblical seminars are of lower status. And that's really difficult because once you Jordan's got a status rocket and he's got coattails, and, you're going to get lift from being in Jordan's status rocket. But that's a better context for him. All right. I've said what I need to say. We'll see where this goes. Leave a comment. I know you've got thoughts.